UN agency dealing, which is a specialized UN agency dealing with the Palestinian refugees. There are 470,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, but most people assume that some of them have already left the country. Moreover, in the last decade, about 1 million or more refugees from Syria, both Syrians and also Palestinian refugees from Syria, have also moved temporarily to Lebanon. I think if we take the Syria into consideration, Lebanon has the highest per capita rate of refugees on its soil on the whole world. So over some 20% of its current population are refugees. And Beirut is the capital city of Lebanon, and Beirut has been a growing metropolis ever since the mid-19th century. And its port, where the explosion occurred, basically it was one of the most vibrant ports in the Eastern Mediterranean, and has been so for many, many decades. For years, when Lebanon was in much better shape, it was often dubbed as the Switzerland of the East. And over the years, as I've taught Lebanese history, I come across to the fact that Lebanon was likened to Switzerland at different times for different reasons. Initially, in the 18th, 19th centuries, for its stunning mountains, which European travelers likened to the Alps in Switzerland. Later on, for the seeming ability of its various religious and ethnic groups inhabiting the country to coexist together, the way the Swiss have been doing in recent centuries, and also for the financial power and stability of its banking system in the 1950s and 1960s. Except for the stunning mountains, which are still stunning, things, of course, have gotten a bit awry in the last few decades. And what happened on August the 4th basically was an indicator of this. There's an amateur video of the explosion. And in this age of, cameras all across the city-state, there are, of course, hundreds of takes of what really happened. Now, it was on August the 4th, a month and a half ago, at 6 p.m. in the afternoon. It was good because, most people at the port had already left work, so we didn't have that many casualties. Had it been earlier, it would have been worse. And we think that the explosion is caused by 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, which had been stored unsafely at the warehouse in the port since 2013. It has been described as unquestionably one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history, far bigger than any conventional weapon. The closest that come is an explosion in Texas, I think in the late 1940s, and another one in China some years earlier. Experts have estimated it to be equal to 1,000 to 1,500 tons of TNT, about the tenth of the intensity of the Hiroshima bomb, and according to the Geological Survey, is equivalent to a 3.3 magnitude earthquake. Considering this, there were about 200 people who lost their lives and about 5,000 injured. Of course, some are very heavy. For example, one of my friends actually lost his eyesight, but others, of course, were relatively mild kind of injuries. And temporarily, some 300,000 people were made homeless, although this is about the first few days. So many of them actually have the basics of their houses restored and have come back, but about 100 buildings or more have to be demolished or have to be seriously, basically repaired before they can be inhabitable again. We don't know exactly how much the total cost of the explosion will be, the damage. It may reach up until $10 to $15 billion. But technically, Lebanon was already in very bad shape even before this explosion. And in that atmosphere, the sitting government, which had formed only a few months back, resigned. And there has been an investigation going on 3 issues: how the shipment ended up in the port of Beirut, because it was not destined for Lebanon in the first place, why such dangerous material was kept there for 7 years, and what caused the eventual explosion. And the investigation has been relatively slow and opaque. Although one thing, foul play terrorism has been ruled out it probably was because of negligence. That, of course, answers the third question, but not the first two. And this slow pace of the investigation has deepened the already apparent lack of trust among the Lebanese public towards not only the sitting government, but also about their whole political system, about which I'm going to talk a little bit later on. Lebanon, which basically had been ostracized for a few months because Western governments and Saudi Arabia did not like the government in power, at least after the explosion, it came again under the focus of international attention. And international assistance was given, although it's mostly relief kind of assistance and nothing that will ultimately have a long-term effect on, making the economy run again smoothly. And politically, it opened the door for France, the former mandatory power in Lebanon. The French were controlling Lebanon from 1918 to the end of World War II. They have shown renewed interest in the future of Lebanon as a country, becoming an important actor in Lebanese politics. But already before the explosion, as I said, there was a deep economic and fiscal crisis in the country, which had erupted for everybody to see in October 2019. Economists had been warning about this for years, but like Cassandra, they were not listened to by people who were enjoying the good life at the time. And massive demonstrations, once it became apparent that the country was practically bankrupt, demanded the immediate removal of the ruling political elite from power, especially because the country at that time had a national unity government, and they also demanded the drastic shakeup of the entire political system. Lebanon, which was going to celebrate its 100th anniversary in 2019, 2020, all these celebrations basically were toned down. And when they occurred on September the 1st this year, only 4 weeks after the explosion, they were very, very low key. The already ineffective national unity government collapsed a few days after the beginning of the demonstrations, but it took them almost 2 months to be able to agree on a new prime minister, and took him another month for him to put together a government. Considering the fact that because of the Lebanese system, sometimes it had taken up to 11 or 13 months to put together a cabinet, this was usually a record that is only 1 month. However, the new cabinet did not enjoy widespread support from the beginning, and it only received a very reluctant vote of confidence. Less than half of the 128 deputies voted for him, and it only basically was a vote of confidence because many people had actually boycotted the final session when the vote took place, and so their presence was not considered as a no vote, but as some kind of an abstention. And one of the major reasons was that the country's Sunni Muslim community, which is one of the 3 largest ethno-religious communities in the country, was unhappy with the choice of prime minister. The prime minister, according to tradition, has to be a Sunni, but most Sunnis basically believe that he did not represent the majority view in their own community, and it was to some extent imposed on them, they believe, by mostly Shiite Hezbollah organization and its allies. The new cabinet remained ostracized by the United States Western allies, as well as Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia's allies in the Arab world, again for the same reason that they consider this to be a government of Hezbollah. Under this difficult conditions, this government, which resigned in August, in March had finally defaulted on paying for the servicing of the debt. This was the first time ever in Lebanon's history that Lebanon was doing this. And since then, we have very tentative negotiations with the IMF to agree on a rescue package. They are still at the preliminary stage, but it is hoped that eventually an agreement with the IMF also will lead into other donations and grants and loans from other countries and donors. And France has some kind of a small consortium, ad hoc consortium, known as the Akram Cedra, which has promised anything between, up to $11 billion, usually for renovating Lebanon's infrastructure. Now, the government resigned in August the 10th, the second government to resign within 10 months, and the new prime minister was appointed on August the 31st. Almost 1 month later, he has still been unable to form a new government, despite the fact that President Macron and his government in France have been heavily involved in the negotiations to put together a new government. Prior to the explosion, so we're not counting this additional 10 to $15 billion of damage, Lebanon's public debt was estimated to be at around $82 billion. By the way, it's mostly internal debt through treasury bonds, which were bought by Lebanese banks. And the external debt in US dollars is relatively less than the 50%. But with a 152% debt to GDP ratio, Lebanon was the third most indebted country in the world, according to this ratio, after Japan and Greece. And considering that the Lebanese economy is much, much smaller and has even more structural problems, even compared to the economy of Greece, this was seen as a very serious problem. In recent years, interest payments to this debt had consumed almost half of the government's revenue. And of course, in the end, the default came, as I said, in March this year. So this is a map of how the debt has grown. The red color is the internal debt, and the blue color is the external debt. And this is until 2012. This one continues of how the debt accumulated, but of course, this chart, which takes up until the year 2019 into existence, basically doesn't make a differentiation between external and internal debt. So why this debt? Well, Lebanon had its own civil war between 1975 and 1990. And so after the end of the civil war, there was reconstruction, and the government borrowed heavily in order to pay for that reconstruction. The strongman in Lebanese politics of the civil war was Rafiq al-Hariri, a Lebanese businessman who had made a fortune in Saudi Arabia and in other parts of the world. And Hariri had this belief, and we're talking about the early 1990s here, a very different time in the Middle East, where the Madrid peace process was going on between, Arab countries, the PLO, and the Israeli government. And Hariri was convinced that peace was on the corner, and he believed that once Lebanon signed the peace treaty with Israel, its debts will be written off. And so he basically bet on, borrowing heavily. And then, of course, peace did not come. And then, of course, this debt and the servicing of the debt escalated. Moreover, during this process, the Lebanese government made a fateful decision to peg the Lebanese pound to the US dollar. It became a very sacred cow, and no president, no prime minister wanted this ratio to be changed, and that really forced the Lebanese central bank to borrow more and more money in order to keep this ratio. Add to that, Lebanon's endemic clientelism, the corruption of its political machinery, and its inefficiency in public spending. And two sectors take a lot of money. One is, of course, public sector employment, when politicians intervene and a lot of people are unnecessarily hired by the government to become clients of those politicians. And secondly, the electricity sector. Lebanon actually spends $2 billion a year for an electricity service. That's the amount of money it costs, even after selling electricity to the subscribers, and still cannot actually provide 24/7 electricity to the consumers. And everybody, including myself, have to also buy electricity from local suppliers as well. So we usually pay 2 electricity bills in Lebanon. And historically, the country has been a merchant republic, a rentier economy with heavy dependence on imports, especially in food as well. It is estimated that something like 80% of the food consumed by the Lebanese was imported before October 2019. And as the debt escalated, and there was the urge by the government and the pressure on the central bank to keep the Lebanese pound at the level it has, so the bank basically had to offer ever higher interest rates for large deposits, but he only could pay for those deposits if he got new depositors. And of course, at one time, that became very difficult to sustain. And technically, the price of the Lebanese pound on the black market has collapsed, although the government is actually trying still to keep this rate for some basic services. Lebanon is no longer a free economy in this case, at least for the past year or so. But these structural problems aside, Lebanon has also been unlucky politically. The civil war in neighboring Syria, as I said, has led to 1 million or more refugees, and that has basically added to government spending. Then a lot of Lebanese go and work outside, and the Gulf states are a good place for these Lebanese migrant workers. Most of them are more from the managerial class, and because of the lower oil prices, the amount of their remittances has been declining. With the increasing influence of Hezbollah, of course, very close to the Iranian government in Lebanese politics, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states who basically dislike, well, to say it mildly, the Iranian regime of Ayatollah Khamenei, they have actually distanced themselves from Lebanon and are now, we're not giving him a hand to help in its problems. And finally, we have in the US, the Trump administration, who is determined to crush Iran and also Hezbollah. So Lebanon is an important arena to wage that struggle. The Trump administration has been using the strength of the American banking system in order to impose indirect, sanctions without UN approval on many countries, and it has done so also on Lebanese banks, even leading to the collapse of a bank or two in Lebanon, because the Trump administration and the Treasury Department here think that those banks were dealing with Hezbollah. And then, since October 2019, the situation has gotten worse, because now there is also the pandemic, which was not there in October, and also because the US Congress has now added new sanctions against the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And of course, Lebanon and Syria are neighbors, and a lot of economic activity goes across the Lebanese-Syrian border as well. Even before the explosion, people knew what the roadmap was, but knowing or having what the roadmap is one thing, being able to fulfill that is another thing. First and foremost, the country needs fiscal and economic reform. It should be the end of what was called the Merchant Republic. The country should try to take steps towards autarky, to be self-sufficient, and of course, to lessen imports. But for that, you also need structural reforms in the government, and that also probably has to lead to political reforms, which basically is questioning the political system that Lebanon has had, not only since independence in 1920, but probably going back to the late Ottoman era in the mid-19th century. I'll come back to this. Moreover, as you will see, in Lebanon, the various communities have their own identities, which are sometimes separate political identities, and many of them basically pull the central state to align itself with this or that outside power. And so that also makes the issue of Lebanon's political alignment a very problematic issue in a troubled geopolitical region. And that is affecting how the IMF, the United States, and the Western powers are also dealing with the Lebanese crisis. Finally, as more oil and gas are being found under the waters of the Eastern Mediterranean, the Lebanese believe that they will also have their share, but they also believe that international organizations, most recently the French company Total, are under foreign pressure, well, implicitly understood to be US pressure, not to actually start digging, so that to keep the Lebanese government on its knees as it is negotiating an end to this fiscal crisis, and hopefully the Americans will also get political benefits from it by weakening Hezbollah and perhaps pushing the Lebanese government to take a more, less aggressive, not to say friendly, attitude towards its southern neighbor Israel, a country which the Lebanese state up until now refuses to recognize, and relations between these two entities, if we can use, are still regulated only by an armistice agreement from 1949. Now, what is this Lebanese political system, which is seen to be at the root of all these problems? Lebanon has a political system which is called consociational democracy. You will not find this adjective even in any spell check on computer because it's a rarely used word, but basically it means power sharing among a country's various groups, in which individuals not only have rights as individual citizens, but are also seen as members of groups, and those groups have rights too, in between, of course, the rights of the central government and also the rights of the state. And this, of course, goes back to the Ottoman period, when these things emerged. Islam usually categorized its subjects according to their religious identities. And based on that, a system called the millet, or the community system, eventually arose in the Ottoman Empire. And Lebanon was part of the Ottoman Empire for 400 years after 1516, during which, of course, individual Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, and other communities, there were no Zoroastrians in Lebanon, but there were various Christian groups and Jews, also had, of course, some kind of limited self-government within their own religious community. And this led into the development of separate identities, which also eventually became separate political identities in many cases. Lebanon's political economic structure was largely feudal up until 1840, but then when that system collapsed and a new system had to be arranged, now your religious affiliation became a very important indicator in determining your place in society. In 1840, some kind of limited self-government was introduced in Mount Lebanon under Ottoman rule, where this whole area, which is now almost roughly 1/3 of the area of modern Lebanon, excluding Beirut, the capital, was divided into two regions, one to be led by a Maronite Christian government and the other one by a Druze Muslim government. This didn't work that well, and in 1861, a different system was introduced in which this whole area was turned into one autonomous unit with a Christian majority, but the Druze, of course, were the second largest religious group, and it seemed to work relatively well up until the outbreak of the First World War, when the Ottomans, of course, abolished this autonomy. What is important here is that this autonomous area did have some sort of representative government, even before the central Ottoman government introduced that concept. But when it came to electing the members of the local assembly, various communities were given reserved seats. So in the legislative of this or administrative council of this autonomous area, there should be X number of Maronites, X number of Druze, X number of Sunnis, and you name it. So that's how this system began in late Ottoman times. And later on, when the French took over Lebanon during World War I and turned it into a mandate of the League of Nations, establishing Lebanon's new borders, and you see on the map here with the blue color, the new borders, which is twice as big as the old Lebanon with those red boundary lines, which was before 1915, they still kept the same kind of system. It is this event, and you see the photo on your left, that the Lebanese were supposed to commemorate on the 1st of September, when the French High Commissioner, a general sitting in the middle in white collars, is proclaiming, the existence of this new state of Lebanon in 1920. And he is surrounded by a Maronite patriarch and also the Sheikh of the Sunnis in the city of Beirut, although the presence of the second was probably a very reluctant one. Under the French, Lebanon had its constitution, which was ratified in 1926. And of course, it has been revised twice. I've talked about major revisions. One when the French left in 1943, and one in 1990 after the end of the Civil War. But basically, these principles have remained unchanged up until now. Lebanon, despite having a very kind of heterogeneous population, at least religiously, is a unitary state. It's a parliamentary democratic republic with a unicameral parliament. People elect their representatives to the national parliament. Elections are held once every 4 years, and also for the local city, town, and village councils, which are held every 6 years. And the president of the republic, who used to have a lot of power, now much less so, is not actually elected by the people, but is actually elected by parliament, which makes it more an issue of intra-elite bargaining rather than popular vote. However, and this constitution was basically based on the French Third Republic constitution, because that was what was in place in France when the Lebanese constitution was being written in 1926, diverges from the French one in a very important fact, to which I referred very briefly a few moments ago. It accords group rights to countries' officially recognized ethno-religious communities. So to some extent, these communities, continuing on the Ottoman millet system, and even more strongly since Ottoman times, basically are the actual constituent bodies, and the central government remains weak. It is at the mercy of the political leaders of these various ethno-religious communities. And to date, Lebanon recognizes that there are 18 religious communities in Lebanon. As you will see, most of them are Christian, 5 are Muslim, and the Jews are the 18, who enjoy these kind of group rights. First, what are these rights? There is no separation between church and state. There is nothing called civil, registration of birth or civil marriage or civil burial. Each Lebanese citizen is believed to be born into one of these groups, and everything that relates to personal and family status law is governed by those communities. So there are different laws for marriage, divorce, inheritance, etc., depending on which community you are a member of. Private education has always been strong in Lebanon, and many of these ethno-religious groups have their own educational networks. But more importantly, in government, at every level, the positions are both elected and appointed are reserved for members of the specific religious groups. It's a form of affirmative action enshrined sometimes in legislation, but mostly through custom. But also one thing which is different from affirmative action is that it puts a cap on your aspiration. For example, it says there should be X number of ministers from this or that community in the cabinet, but it always says that prime minister should always be a Sunni Muslim, the president of the country should be a Maronite Christian. So if you are not born a Maronite, you cannot aspire to be a president of the country. If you're not born a Sunni, basically you cannot aspire to be prime minister in the country. You should really get used to what is given to you according to the size of your community that you were born into. Because numbers do matter, Lebanese have always avoided conducting censuses. The first full and only census in the country occurred in 1932. And at that time, the Christians were slightly more than Muslims in the country, and the Maronites were definitely the largest Christian community, and so got the biggest share of positions in government. The Sunnis were second, and Shiis were third in size. Now, fast forward 2018, we don't have a census, but we have an estimate made by a relatively serious and well-respected statistics organization in Lebanon, a rare event, and it published its results last year based on counts made in 2018. It has counted only those people who have Lebanese citizenship. And you can do this because at some stage your religious affiliation is written. So if you go into government records, you will find. And now you see how much those proportions have changed over the years. Now the Christians are only 30% of the overall population, when they were 50% in 1932, and the Muslims are now almost 70%. Now, the Maronites are the third largest community. The Shiites have jumped from the third to first. They have just edged the Sunnis in the last few years, and the Sunnis still remain in the second position. The Druze, in percentage terms, the third Muslim community, have also gotten smaller in percentage terms. And these communities don't live in different parts of the country. So there are different concentrations. And that's why during the Civil War, they unofficially turned into cantons or whatever, which are governed by local political bosses, etc., which even makes it more difficult to find solutions. Now, not only numbers have changed, but also other aspects have changed. Political historians who have dealt with Lebanon have always talked about this uneven development. The different communities were not only of different sizes, but they were also of different socioeconomic status. In the beginning, the Christians were not only more numerous, they were also better educated. These are the rates of literacy in 1932, when you see the top three are Christian groups, while the Druze, the Sunnis, and the Shias are relatively to the bottom. I'm not talking here about the smaller communities, probably because they're too small to make any difference. Now, of course, literacy rates overall have grown, and this one is a very interesting thing. We talked about private education. In 1920, there were 492 private schools, mostly religious schools in Lebanon, of which 451 were Christian. In 1978, a generation ago, I don't have the number of schools had gone to 848, but look at the numbers of Christian schools. By being the 90%, 91% in 1920, they had shrunk to 64%. So, which also shows that over the years, the Muslim communities also are getting better educated, also more numerous, and also in wealth. While just after the Civil War, among the top 30 families who are wealthy in Lebanon, 24 of them were Christian. Today, the two richest families in Lebanon are both Sunni Muslim. And I think the Sunni Muslim community has benefited much more from the Gulf economy booming after World War II than other communities in Lebanon, again, because they share a religious affiliation with the sheikhs and princes and kings of the Gulf region. And so in this case, the problem comes that if you have the principle that you're going to share these power arrangements, how do you share them? The problem is that the system has always been rigid. It doesn't correct itself automatically. So every time there has to be a serious political crisis in which the have-nots will demand for more and get more rights. The 1926 Constitution says that power should be distributed among various communities. It doesn't specify how. In 1936, when there was hope that Lebanon would become fully independent, this was postponed because of the outbreak of World War II. The Lebanese government, which was Christian-dominated, actually agreed to guarantee a fair representation of all communities in the state institutions. And this has become part of the Lebanese language, 6 and 6b, in Arabic, Sitta wa Sitta Mukarrar, which simply means that for every Christian, there should also be a Muslim on the other hand. To the extent that, for example, if a Muslim is condemned to death, probably he has to stay for execution until he and the Christian are also hanged together. And if one of them is strong enough and gets a pardon, the other one is lucky because that person all helps will get a pardon. This is one of the most bizarre cases. In 1943, when Lebanon was going to become independent, an agreement was reached that in parliament there should be 6 Christians to every 5 Muslims, but in the cabinet there should be 50-50 difference, but the president should be Christian Maronite, the prime minister should be a Sunni Muslim, and then the idea came that the speaker of parliament should be a Shiite Muslim. After 1950, when there was a war, President Fuad Shihab introduced this 50-50 principle in the administration. After the Lebanese civil war, the president remained Maronite, but his prerogatives were basically very much reduced and were given to the cabinet. They are exercised by the Sunni prime minister. And also in parliament, a 50-50 equation was happened. So remember now, the Christians today constitute 30% of the population of Lebanon, but they have 50% of the parliamentary seats, and also 50% of the top government positions, etc., which introduces a certain element. Now, a lot of people have been talking in the last 15 years or so that there is a new adjustment because, where initially all the Muslims were seen as one, and usually the Sunni Muslims were in the leading role. In the last 50 years or so, the Shiites have become stronger and want to distinguish themselves from the Sunnis. So today we basically talk about three communities: the Christians, led by the Maronites, the Sunnis, and the Shiis. And the Sunnis and the Shiis do not see eye to eye on many issues in Lebanon. And here comes this idea of, if these communities see themselves as different, their allegiances to various sects override the overall allegiance to the country. These sects have traditionally, even from Ottoman times, have developed different relations with different external backers. And this has led to two issues. In the local politics, they use this foreign backers in order to score points against their local rivals from other communities. The Lebanese call it al-istiqwa bil-kharij. I tried to explain it as bullying through outside assistance, maybe, and sometimes complain that they are involved in the wars of others in Lebanon, but essentially they are the fighters, but often they are financed by foreign backers. And this has, of course, changed over the years. In the French Mandate era, the Christians look towards France, while the Sunni Muslims look towards Damascus, the capital of Syria. Then in the age of Abdel Nasser, the Muslims look towards Cairo, while of course the Christians and conservative Muslims look towards the West. Now, the United States was a new power, but also regionally Iraq until 1958 and later on Saudi Arabia. In the rise of the age of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Lebanon, the radical left Muslims look towards the PLO, the Christians look towards the West, and even very briefly towards Israel in late 1970s, early 1980s. Then after the Civil War, there was some kind of an international agreement that Syria is the boss in Lebanon. So essentially, Lebanese politics was frozen for about 15 years, where all the decisions were made in Damascus. But all the Syrians were forced to leave. Now, of course, in the new age of political Shiism, and with a lot of backing to the Shiite community coming from Iran, the new struggle has been between, the Saudi-backed Sunnis against the Iranian-backed Shiis, and with the Christians torn in between and in a relatively weak position. Now, in recent months, people are saying that Erdogan's Turkey and Macron's France are also showing a lot of involvement in Lebanese politics, and we don't know what the new arrangement will be and how external power sharing will also be achieved. And people think that unless there is some kind of a consensus on this issue, the situation in Lebanon will not get better. Most Lebanese have no hope that things will get better until the American elections, and they don't know what to expect after the elections, depending on whether Biden wins, will he go back to Obama's politics, or if Trump wins and stays in power, whether he will continue his tough line or come to some kind of agreement with Iran, and that's where the Lebanese are suspended these days. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hara. That was really a great presentation. Really appreciate you taking the time to present this to everyone today. So we had a couple of questions that I will read out. We have 4 of them. The first 2 come from Ed Williams from the College of Business. The first question, he says, is, when you use the term mandatory power earlier on in your presentation, Hara, does that term refer to the fact that Lebanon was once a French colony or a French protectorate?
It was not a colony. The whole concept of the mandate emerged after the end of World War I as part of the League of Nations. National self-determination was an important slogan at the time. And 2 governments, the United States government of President Wilson and the Soviet government of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, were pushing for that. And the French and the British, who actually had their colonial ambitions, came up to this compromise that said, okay, these areas that were previously part of the German and the Ottoman empires, they have the right to become independent, but they're still young. We have to take care of them until they mature, and an unended, open-ended kind of a mandate was given to them. In the case of Lebanon and Syria, it stayed for about 25 years, after which the French were forced to leave. During World War II, also under British, American, and Soviet pressure as well. De Gaulle was basically told implicitly, your time is up, France. You have to come up with the reality. So mandate meant, Dr. Williams, that you have your local institutions, but ultimately enshrined in the Constitution are what the League of Nations mandates, which basically means that no foreign policy, and the right of the representative of the French government was called the High Commissioner to overrule many, many things. In 1943, when the Lebanese wanted to become independent, they just removed all those articles from the Constitution, and most of the powers of the High Commissioner were passed on to the Maronite president, giving the Maronites a lot of power up until the Civil War of 1975. So that's, I think, the first part.
Okay, great. Second part, just real quick from that again, when you referred to literacy earlier and literacy rates in Lebanon, were you referring to the ability to read Arabic, French, either one, all languages?
I assume it should be Arabic, because as far as I know from the source that I have used, it doesn't mention, but probably it should be Arabic. For a long, long time, French was the dominant language in France, even starting from Ottoman times. But also English had made inroads because there was also heavy US missionary activity in Lebanon in the 19th century. And the product of these two missionary activities are two of the Beirut's very established universities, which go back to Ottoman times, to the mid-19th century. The French university, which is run by the Jesuits, the St. Joseph University, and the American University of Beirut, which used to be called the Syrian Protestant College up until the state of Lebanon was created in 1920. So basically, I assume it's basically literacy in Arabic.
Okay, great, thanks. I hope we was able to answer your questions, Ed. This one comes from Kamameen, and you're going to have to pardon my pronunciation here, but so the question is the case that the Shiite communities were not a major part of the Lebanese semi-autonomous polities until post-Ottoman times? It seems as though predominantly Shia areas were not part of the Mutasrifat.
Mutasarrifi. I avoided that term. It's autonomous Lebanon, yes.
Okay. Not sure how the population may have shifted, grown over time, regardless of the political boundaries.
Look, there were few Shiites, but there were also very few Sunnis in Mount Lebanon when it was autonomous. As I said, it was 1/3 the size of modern Lebanon. When the country expanded at the end of World War I, and the Christians wanted expansion because Mount Lebanon is mostly mountainous area, and its economy was based on sericulture, that is, raising silkworms and exporting them. And also they have a very good industry of orchards, that is, producing fruit. But when it came to cereals, they're very much dependent on imports. So actually expansion, that was the major argument, because in World War I, that really created a famine in Lebanon. So once they expanded, Sunni and Shiite communities came into Lebanon in large numbers. I showed you the 1932 figures. But in that, you saw that the Shiites were basically the least educated family at the time. The reason, I'm sure Professor Amin would know about that, because the Sunnis were the religion of the Caliph in the Ottoman Empire. They had access to Istanbul and other places, while the Shiites, seen as heterodox Muslims, could at most, carry out a self-enclosed existence. The Shiites in Lebanon were not persecuted that much. They were too far away from the borders of the Iran. So the Ottomans did not see them as a fifth column, if we can use that term for that time, like they looked at the Shias in Iraq, but essentially they had very few opportunities. It's only in the 1960s that the Shiites in Lebanon start becoming an important factor. They pay a lot of attention to their own education, community organization, and two things stand out. One is the religious leader who has of course Arab roots, but had grown in Iran, Musa Sadr, who came to Lebanon, and he was really a person who mobilized them. And then, of course, the Iranian Revolution, where the Iranian government started pouring a lot of money, and helped the Shiites organize themselves. And today, basically, Hezbollah has, we can say, a state within a non-state, as some people say, because it has a huge organization, a huge following, an army, institutions, etc., which basically can rival the institutions of the Lebanese state in certain cases, in some cases. There are some fields which they have not touched.
Cool. So another one quick from Cam. Do we know who owned the ammonium nitrate that was being stored in the port?
Look, it's as far as I know, it's a very tricky business. It was destined to go to Mozambique. It was purchased from, I think, somewhere in the former Soviet Union. I'm not sure whether it's Russia or Ukraine. It was loaded on the ship in Batumi, which is the port of Georgia. Could not pass the Suez Canal for some technical reason. So came to Lebanon and was confiscated there for papers being inappropriate. And then for some 7 years, it remained in a warehouse. So this has been a major issue. Some people are thinking that all this may have already been, this is a kind of a conspiratorial thinking, but Lebanon has seen so much that you may excuse some Lebanese people to have this kind of, that probably was destined for the Beirut port, and all the else was some kind of a cover story, etc. Although they're trying to follow, as far as I know, if there was such a company in Mozambique, did it actually ask it, what did it do, when it did not receive the the product that they had actually bought, etc. I think they have talked to the captain who was a Russian person of that ship, etc. So that's the whole idea. Technically, the Lebanese government either should have destroyed it, or should have resent it to somewhere else, or probably sold by auction. But it's too much even for the Lebanese to use it, because I'm told it's used for two things. One, as a fertilizer, and Lebanese, farmers do use it, but you don't need that kind of amounts. And if you add certain things, it can be used as explosives. And in Lebanon, it's used for quarries. But the problem is that even in all the Lebanese quarries do not need that much ammonium nitrate in any case, even if they are going to work at a full load for a number of years. So this has been the issue.
Okay. I have two questions I think are from students. I know there was another faculty member, but if they'll forgive me and let me ask some student questions, that'd be great. So the first one is from Mackenzie to you, Dr. Sanjian. Do you think that a resurgence in French interest in Lebanon will be good or bad for the nation as a whole?
At the moment, France is the least disliked candidate by all sides. In the sense that most communities, including the Shiites, the Sunnis, traditional Christians, have less misgivings about France's role compared to the other people like the United States, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and now Turkey is trying to come in. And also in the Turkey's case, the Sunnis remember the Ottoman Empire fondly. The Christians, the Shiis, the Druze don't. And because a lot of the rhetoric of President Erdogan is going back to the Ottoman era, that kind of neo-Ottomanism is being used. At the moment, the Lebanese know that there should be somebody to bring them together. And it seems that most of them want France to play that role. Although some people who dislike America, that faction, are seeing that the Americans, in this case, with the Trump administration, are making things difficult for them. Those people are waiting for a democratic administration because they think that Obama's policies of trying to reach an agreement with Iran was helpful for Lebanon in that sense. But in any case, the Lebanese will be the victims of whatever policy is there, because I don't think anybody in America from either party will ever ask the Lebanese what they want us to do when they decide on their policies with the Iranian regime. So overall, the French are remembered a bit fondly today. People remember that French did good things. The French don't have a long history of violence in Lebanon. We don't have that kind of Algerian power struggle, so etc. And I made a joke a few days back when Macron came to Lebanon a few days after the explosion. Some petition on internet had gathered 50,000 Lebanese asking France to come back as a mandatory power for a 10-year period. Some people, of course, said this was, unpatriotic to do something like this. Then I wrote just a joke on my Facebook status saying, it is said that when the French occupied Damascus in 1920, that same general who you saw in that white uniform actually went to the tomb of Saladin in Damascus and said, "We're back," considering himself as a continuation of the Crusaders.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if this is true or not. Well, we don't know. Okay. But I said, imagine Macron going back to the tombs of those Lebanese politicians who the French imprisoned because they wanted independence, and tell them, your people want us back. And at that time, the French had used Senegalese soldiers to arrest them, which led into unfortunate racism in Lebanon. The Lebanese prefer to be arrested by white Frenchmen rather than, I'm sorry to say, but that's the reality, by, African Senegalese. But I said, if today the Macron sends any soldier arresting the leadership, the Lebanese people will not come to the streets protesting, they will come cheering, because as I said, the whole political system has lost its credibility. The problem is, because the country is fractured, there is not unifying person to bring the people to the streets and said, I am going to be your transitory leader, leading you to the next stage.
Okay. We have 2 minutes, and if you can get 2 quick questions in those 2 minutes, that would be great. And I think this may shut itself down at 4. So what was Syria's motive for intervening in the civil war on the side of the Christians?
To make sure that the Lebanese system of consociationalism and power sharing will remain, because Syria is also with that kind of diverse population, as you know. And secondly, it was afraid that a radical leftist regime may come into Lebanon, and Hafez compared to that was more to the right. And so it wanted to prevent the leftists in the Arab world from actually having an even leftier government in Lebanon coming.
Okay, thanks. And that was from one of my former students, Max Kamak. And then we have a minute. One last question from Antonius Kumpias. Question for Ara: has Lebanon delineated an exclusive economic zone with its neighbors?
Lebanon, of course, technically I don't know, but of course Lebanon has no relation with Israel. Lebanon uses Syria as some kind of a breathing space, because it's through Syria that Lebanon exports to the Arab world. But of course, that has been very difficult for Lebanon in the last 10 years. And of course, the second one is the port. And now, of course, since most of our trade is carried out by the port is working at slow progress. It started reworking a few days later, but of course, it will take years. And there are other ports in the country, in the sense that, but in a way, at the moment, Lebanon doesn't know where it really stands on these issues.
Okay. And Antonius has a follow-up to that. Antonius, if you just want to email Ara with the questions, since I think we're out of time. I appreciate everybody coming in today, everybody with your interest and taking time to hear this great presentation by our colleague, Ara Sanjian. We'll have several more coming up. I believe next month we are going to talk to 2 professors who dealing with events in Belarus. So maybe we can have what happened in Minsk instead of what happened in Beirut. So thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon. It's a nice day out. So there's, we do get fall in Michigan. It's one of the better things we get. So have a wonderful afternoon, and thanks. Bye, everyone.